Iran is sharpening its warnings toward Washington, insisting that the United States and Israel will eventually be pushed out of the region without any achievements, even as the U.S. military prepares to tighten maritime pressure around Iranian ports and the Strait of Hormuz. Brigadier General Esmail Qaani, the commander of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Quds Force, framed the moment as part of a long confrontation stretching across multiple theaters. He said the U.S. and the Zionist regime should remember how they fled empty-handed from Yemen, Bab el-Mandeb, and the Red Sea, asking that what Iran calls an integrated front of resistance remains intact and ready for renewed confrontation. He portrayed the current standoff not as a new crisis, but as another chapter in a wider struggle in which Tehran believes outside powers failed to secure lasting outcomes. Those remarks are landing at a time when the United States is moving from warnings to implementation. After say, ceasefire talks ended without an agreement. Washington announced it would begin enforcing restrictions aimed at Iran-linked maritime activity. The operational plan, as described by U.S. officials, is not a total shutdown of all traffic through the strait. Instead, the focus is on vessels traveling to or from Iranian ports and coastal areas, with U.S. officials saying commercial traffic between non-Iranian ports should still be able to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. The timeline is immediate. The U.S. military says the operation begins on Monday at 1400 GMT, a start time that places the opening moves in the middle of the trading day across Europe and during early morning hours in the United States, precisely the window when any disruption can ricochet quickly into energy markets. Iran is answering that step with an even darker warning, one that suggests the ceasefire that halted weeks of combat could unravel at sea first. In a statement loaded with red lines, the IRGC warned that an Y military vessel attempting to enter the Strait of Hormuz would be treated as a direct violation of the ceasefire with the United States. Iran insisted that civilian shipping may still be able to move under strict conditions that it says it sets, but that any military presence, regardless of the mission claimed, would trigger what it described as a firm and decisive response. The message is designed to leave little room for misunderstanding. The strait is open, Iran says, but only under what it calls intelligent management, meaning Iranian forces claim the authority to decide what passes and under what terms. U.S. officials reject that framing. Washington's position is that it is acting to preserve freedom of navigation and keep a global economic artery from becoming hostage to coercion. That clash of narratives, control versus free passage, is now colliding with the reality that the strait is not just a symbol, it is one of the most sensitive choke points on Earth, a narrow corridor through which a major share of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas flows. Even small disruptions can send shockwaves through energy prices, insurance rates, and shipping schedules, which then spill into inflation and supply chains far from the Gulf. The danger is that both sides appear to be drawing lines that are easy to cross accidentally. Tehran says a military transit is a ceasefire breach. Washington says it has a right to move naval vessels to protect shipping and clear hazards, and each side accuses the other of destabilizing actions. U.S. Central Command has said American warships have already transited the Strait of Hormuz as part of operations to clear suspected sea mines and protect maritime routes. Iran has pushed back hard, disputing key elements of that account and insisting that it not the United States controls what happens in the strait. The argument over mines is especially combustible. Mines are cheap, hard to detect, and capable of creating massive fear and when they do not detonate. The mere suspicion of mines can slow traffic to a crawl, forcing ships to wait for escorts, reroute, or demand higher insurance coverage. In markets, perception can be as powerful as reality. Iranian commanders have leaned into that leverage in recent weeks, warning that any escalation could pull U.S. and allied forces into what they describe as a deadly whirlpool of destruction. The language is not subtle. It is meant to signal both capability and intent, and to raise the cost of U.S. enforcement before the first boarding attempt or interdiction takes place. This comes after a conflict that both sides publicly say they paused but did not resolve. The ceasefire, announced as a two-week arrangement after intense hostilities, was meant to stop the immediate exchange of fire and open space for diplomacy. Yet negotiations in Islamabad ended without a breakthrough, and the core dispute, Tehran's nuclear program and the broader security architecture of the ION remains untouched. The diplomatic collapse is now feeding a maritime showdown. After nearly a full day of talks, President Donald Trump announced what he described as a sweeping escalation. The U.S. Navy would begin the process of blockading ships connected to Iran's maritime lifelines. In public messaging, the administration framed the move as a response to Iranian attempts to dictate terms in the Strait of Hormuz, including allegations that Iran was imposing transit tolls and using intimidation to force compliance. The stated U.S. Objective is to prevent Iran from using the strait as an economic weapon while still keeping commercial shipping moving for the rest of the world. U.S. officials have emphasized that the enforcement would focus on traffic entering or leaving Iranian ports rather than shutting down the entire strait to everyone. But Tehran's counter message is that any U.S. military move into the area is itself the provocation, and that enforcement actions at sea will be met with force. The stakes are multiplied by the density of military assets in a small space. The Persian Gulf region can quickly become crowded. Warships, patrol boats, drones, helicopters, surveillance aircraft, and commercial tankers, all operating close to each other, often at high speed, often under stress, and often with limited trust in radio communication. In that environment, escalation does not require a deliberate decision to start a war. It can come from a misread maneuver, a radar lock interpreted as a threat, a warning shot that becomes a real engagement, or an attempt to board a vessel that triggers a rapid defensive reaction. Both sides know this history. Both sides say they are prepared. Iran's threat is also shaped by what it claims happened during the previous weeks of fighting. Iranian leaders say they launched repeated waves of retaliatory strikes against American and Israeli targets, and that they restricted access to the strait in ways that rattled global markets. Shipping through the waterway slowed sharply, and energy traders began pricing in the risk of prolonged disruption. In the aftermath, Iran has reportedly allowed limited passage for vessels from countries it views as friendly, while signaling that others could face delays, scrutiny, or higher costs. Reports of an emerging toll system, whether formal or informal, add another layer of alarm for shipping companies, because payment itself could become grounds for interdiction under the new U.S. posture. That is where the U.S. threat to interdict ships becomes more than rhetoric. If Washington seeks to stop vessels it believes have paid Iran for passage, then every transaction, routing decision, and port call becomes a potential trigger for confrontation. Shipping firms may face an impossible choice: comply with Iranian demands to reduce immediate risk in the strait, or refuse and risk U.S. interdiction, or resist and risk being delayed or targeted in Iranian-controlled waters. The gulf between Washington and Tehran is also widened by the way each frames legitimacy. Iran presents itself as defending sovereignty in its near waters and protecting what it calls regional resistance movements. The United States presents itself as defending international shipping routes and resisting extortion at a global choke point. And both sides are now addressing not only each other, but multiple audiences at once: domestic political bases, regional partners, rival powers watching for weakness, and energy markets that can punish uncertainty instantly. Iran's messaging also reaches beyond the strait. By invoking theaters like Yemen and the Red Sea, Iranian commanders are pointing to a broader arc of conflict in which Iran-backed or Iran-aligned groups have demonstrated the ability to harass shipping, launch missiles and drones, and raise the costs of military operations. The idea is to remind Washington that maritime confrontation in Hormuz would not exist in isolation. It would sit inside a regional web of pressure points. The U.S. Planners, in turn, are emphasizing that they can apply pressure selectively. By targeting Iranian port traffic rather than trying to halt every ship in the Strait of Hormuz, Washington can claim it is not closing a global artery, only restricting Iran's ability to profit from it. But even a targeted blockade carries enormous risk. Iran's economy depends on maritime access. A squeeze on ports can quickly become existential in Tehran's eyes, and existential pressure tends to produce escalatory responses. That is why the IRGC warning about military vessels is so significant. It is not just about symbolism. It sets a condition that, if enforced, could quickly put Iranian forces and U.S. naval assets on a direct collision course. The immediate question now is how enforcement will look in practice. If U.S. forces begin stopping ships suspected of traveling to or from Iranian ports, how will they identify targets? How will they communicate intent? And how will they conduct boardings in a narrow, tense environment? Will they rely on inspections, escorts, or distant interdictions? And how will Iran respond? Through direct engagement, harassment tactics, drone surveillance, or asymmetric strikes elsewhere? Then there is the question of time. The announced start time Monday at 1400 GMT creates a predictable moment when each side may want to demonstrate resolve. That can be dangerous because predictable moments invite choreography, warning statements, staged maneuvers, visible deployments, and public claims of victories. In a crisis, theater can become reality fast. The ceasefire still exists on paper, and both sides say they support it. But the language from Tehran and Washington suggests the ceasefire is now thin and conditional, less a settlement than a pause between rounds. On one side, the United States is signaling it will enforce maritime restrictions and will not accept an Iranian system of tolls or controlled passage. On the other, Iran is signaling it will treat military movement as a hostile act and claims authority over who can pass and under what conditions. Between those positions is the world's most important energy choke point, and a region where miscalculation has repeatedly turned tension into conflict. For now, commercial shipping is watching the clock, insurers are recalculating risk, and governments across the region are bracing for the possibility that the next escalation will not begin with a missile launch, but with a ship's approach, a radio call, and an order to stop. And over all of it hangs the warning from Iran's senior commanders: the United States and Israel, they insist, will eventually be forced out without gains, and the region's resistance front remains ready. He said the U.S. and the Zionist regime should remember how they fled empty-handed from Yemen, Bab el-Mandeb, and the Red Sea. And he argued that the same outcome awaits a gain. Whether that becomes prophecy or propaganda may depend on what happens when the blockade begins and on whether either side can prevent a confrontation at sea from igniting a wider war.